London, 2023. Inside a museum basement, a volunteer wipes the dust from an old cardboard box. The label has nearly vanished under 8 decades of grime. 2 words remain clear: prisoners' recordings. He threads a brittle reel onto a restored machine, presses a button, and waits. At first, nothing, then the hiss of time itself, the faint crackle of ancient tape, and suddenly, a voice, soft, hesitant, trembling through the static. German words echo across 80 years. "Tell my mother I'm safe." Everyone in the room goes silent. The speaker's name on the logbook reads Heinrich Müller, captured in North Africa, recorded in 1943, presumed missing after transport. For his family, he never came home. And now, after nearly a lifetime of silence, his voice breaks through the noise again, alive on spinning tape, delicate as breath. The engineer rewinds and plays it again just to be sure, but each repetition only deepens the shock. It isn't fragments of an interrogation, it's a message. 30 seconds of humanity caught between war and hope. 30 seconds that somehow survived bombs, mold, neglect, and the slow forgetting of history. For decades, entire generations grew up believing they'd never hear their fathers or grandfathers speak again. But hidden in dusty archives across Europe and America were hundreds of similar reels recordings made in Allied camps under a Red Cross program allowing prisoners to send audio letters home. Tiny moments of mercy surrounded by barbed wire. Now restored one reel at a time, those voices are singing back into the 21st century. Some plead, some laugh nervously. Most simply say what every mother longed to hear: "I'm alive." Imagine hearing the voice of a relative you never met, recorded before you were born, locked away for 80 years. That's not history, that's resurrection through sound. Over the next few minutes, you'll hear how these long-lost messages were captured, forgotten, and rediscovered. You'll meet the people who heard their family speak again, after believing those voices were gone forever. And you'll understand why a few words recorded in captivity may be the most powerful reminder of peace we've ever found. Because in the end, history isn't written only on paper. Sometimes it's whispered on tape. The year was 1943. The world was drowning in silence. Millions of families had stopped receiving letters. Thousands of soldiers simply vanished into different corners of the war. For every family that waited, the question became its own kind of wound. Are they alive? The Geneva Convention required that prisoners of war be allowed to send messages home. Usually that meant a single sheet of paper censored, folded, and stamped. But radios could carry messages faster, and Allied intelligence realized sound could travel where mail could not. In Britain, engineers built a network of recording rooms inside Army intelligence centers. In America, similar studios appeared at Fort Hunt, Virginia. Each room looked simple: a microphone, a chair, a small sign on the wall that said, "Speak clearly and briefly." Prisoners brought in under Red Cross supervision were told, "You may record one short message to your family. No politics, no locations, only reassurance." Then, for 30 seconds, they were allowed to speak into the microphone. The reel rolled, the light blinked red, and what came out was never meant to be heard by history, only by one household somewhere across an ocean. A typical message began the same way. "Here is Corporal Otto Schmidt, camp number 133, Canada. Mother, I am well. Please don't worry, I will write again soon." That voice would then be transmitted by shortwave radio, where families were told when to listen. Whole neighborhoods gathered around sets, tuning dials like treasure hunters, searching for one beloved accent in the static. For many, those broadcasts were life itself. Hearing even a second of a son's voice turned grief into hope and gave each day meaning again. Yet behind each message Other microphones were recording too, the ones used for analysis. Linguists, psychologists, and code specialists studied tone, accent, phrasing. They weren't only listening for comfort, they were studying the enemy. A single phrase could reveal morale, dialect, or hidden information. The technology that carried love also carried strategy. After the war, when the interrogations ended, the message reels were boxed and labeled by date, base, and nationality. Their usefulness was finished, so they were moved to storerooms in London, Washington, Ottawa, and then forgotten. Magnetic tape gathered dust as new conflicts came and went. The machines that could play them were replaced, sold, thrown out. By the 1970s, few archivists even knew the recordings existed. They sat silent, waiting for someone in a future they couldn't imagine to press play. These reels began as instruments of war, but they were destined to become something far greater. Echoes of love escaping through the cracks of battle. All they needed was a new listener. For almost 8 decades, the boxes sat untouched, their labels fading, their tape reels brittle and warped beneath layers of dust. Archivists walked past them every day, unaware they held a treasure chest of human voices sealed by time. Then, in 2023, a small restoration team at the Imperial War Museum in London decided to digitize some forgotten magnetic spools marked simply Prisoner Messages Europe, 1943. Most expected only administrative chatter or broken static, but when the first reel clicked into a refurbished recorder, the hum built, the hiss grew louder. Then a nervous laugh echoed through the speakers. A man's voice, weak but unmistakably alive. He introduced himself. "Here is Obergefreiter Franz Keller. Tell my mother and father I am well. I hope you receive this soon. God watch over you." The room went silent. Technicians exchanged glances, half wonder, half disbelief. They played it again, slower this time. The accent, the pauses, the breath between words were still clear. Somewhere in that old reel, the air of 1943 was breathing again. Word spread quickly. Archivists began opening more boxes, unspooling hundreds of similar tapes. There were voices from North Africa, Italy, France, Japan, men speaking German, Italian, Japanese, English. Each used different words, but every message carried the same heartbeat: faith, relief, and longing. Restoration wasn't easy. Many reels had warped or snapped. Some had rusted spindles frozen in place. It required nanometer precision scanners, digital stitching, and patient human ears. Some fragments lasted only 10 seconds before breaking into noise, but even those few seconds held power enough to pull tears. The Discovery team logged every recovered name, time, and camp location. In less than 6 months, they had restored over 300 complete recordings. Then the question arose, who should hear them first? The answer came from a young curator named Elena Moretti. She proposed that each voice should be matched, if possible, with descendants. "It isn't history," she said. "It's conversation delayed by 80 years." Her words became the project's motto. Voices returned. Volunteers began the painstaking search through Red Cross lists and post-war immigration files. Emails crossed oceans. Descendants were located in Germany, Austria, Italy, and even South America. One of the first families to respond belonged to Heinrich Miller, the same prisoner whose reel included the phrase, "Tell my mother I'm safe." His daughter, now in her late 80s, had been a little girl when he vanished. She believed his plane had gone down over Libya. When the audio reached her, she asked for a translator, even though she still spoke her father's dialect. Then she pressed play. At the first sound of his breath, she covered her mouth. When the words came simple, formal, distant, she whispered, "That's him." Not because she recognized the name, but because she recognized the way he said her name. Lena. That night she called the museum back just to thank them for giving me back his voice. Soon, international broadcasters carried the story. People who had never known these men listened, mesmerized, to the same uncertain sentences, some hopeful, some resigned, all young. Students recorded reaction videos. Veterans groups organized public listening sessions. In libraries filled with laptops and headphones, strangers sat motionless as ghosts from history spoke directly into their ears. It is one thing to read about loss. It is another to hear it breathe. When those forgotten reels finally spun again, the war stopped being ink on paper and turned back into what it always was, people waiting to be heard. The news about the recovered reels spread faster than anyone expected. Television networks called it the voices that came back from the war. But for families who received those files, it wasn't a headline, it was a heartbeat. In Munich, an elderly woman opened a link sent by the museum. Her hands shook as she put on the headphones. From the speakers came a soft pop, then her father's voice, recorded when he was 22. He said her name as if she were still a child. She closed her eyes, smiled, and whispered, "I've been waiting 80 years to hear that." Across the Atlantic, a group of students in New York listened to the same recordings as part of a history class. When the first words played, the classroom went silent. One student said afterward, "I always thought of World War II as black and white pictures. Now it sounds like someone breathing next to you." In Berlin, sound technicians staged a small public listening event in a theater that had survived Allied bombing. Relatives sat together in rows, each with a pair of headphones. As the voices played, there were no cheers, no speeches, only tears. A man in the front whispered, "They all sound so young." Back in London, the restoration team watched these scenes on social media, humbled and stunned. They had expected interest from historians, but what poured in were thousands of personal stories, diaries rediscovered, photos shared, letters translated, all inspired by hearing those basic words, "I am alive, don't worry." Museums began creating immersive rooms where the voices loop against projected photographs of the men speaking. Visitors step inside dark halls with dim spotlights. The air fills with soft German, French, Italian phrases overlapping like prayers. Every 30 seconds, a new voice begins, each one separated by silence long enough for it to sink in. What moved archive director Elena Moretti most weren't big speeches or headlines, it was the smallest things. One engineer playing a reel alone at midnight, a janitor stopping in the doorway and saying, "He sounds just like my dad." She said, "After a while, we stopped calling them recordings. We started calling them people." Not all reactions came from Europe. Across rural towns in America, former camp guards' families reached out too. Some had kept souvenirs, postcards, handmade carvings, sketches left behind by the prisoners they once watched. They donated them to museums so that at last, the two sides of the conversation could sit in the same display case, a carving and the voice of the man who carved it. As the project grew, it blurred the old boundaries between Allies and Axis completely. Every country had its own recoveries, every reel a new surprise. Japanese, Soviet, Italian, Australian, and American soldiers who'd spoken brief, homesick sentences now shared a single digital archive, accessible to everyone. For the first time in history, enemies from the same war were talking together not in anger but in echoes. Interviews with scientists drew millions of views. Black and white photographs dissolve into the sound of trembling words. Audiences leaned closer to speakers not to understand language, but to feel tone, the same universal grammar of love, fear, and longing. A journalist wrote, "We used to study World War II through the silence of those who never came home. Now, for a few seconds at a time, they speak again, and they're all saying the same thing, 'I'm human.' And somewhere between that sentence and the static that follows it, Every listener hears something they don't expect: peace. The reels are quiet again. They rest in climate-controlled cabinets, no longer forgotten, now carefully labeled and stored in digital clouds that will outlive everyone who first pressed record. When you listen to them today, with earbuds and Wi-Fi instead of radios and static, it's hard not to close your eyes and picture the faces behind each voice. A young man rehearsing the words in his head because he doesn't want to cry when the red light turns on. A technician nodding gently, telling him the microphone is ready. A breath, a click, a few heartbeats of courage, then, "Tell my mother I'm safe." Click. Silence again. That's all it was, 30 seconds. And somehow it outlasted dictatorships, front lines, and oceans. Those sounds have become more than artifacts. They are bridges. Historians call them primary sources, but families call them voices. In every museum where the project now plays, people lean forward, instinctively trying to answer back. They whisper, "I hear you," even though the person they answer has been gone for 80 years. The impact is reaching schools too. Teachers use the tapes so students can hear that war isn't about numbers or dates, it's about breathing human beings who tremble when they speak of home. A single voice conveys what textbooks cannot: the cost of silence and the value of mercy. Technology built for analysis has become a vessel for empathy. What once measured fear now amplifies connection. Old enemy nations lend each other audio engineers and linguists to preserve what's left. For once, competing governments don't argue over ownership, they just listen. Many of the families who found their relatives' recordings have since donated personal letters and photographs to accompany the audio. Together they form a new kind of memorial, one that speaks literally. Visitors walk into darkened rooms and hear overlapping voices saying, "I'm alive. Don't worry. God protect you." No marble names, no rifles pointing skyward, just sound floating in air. A historian involved in the project said it best: "Each message is a love note that traveled through war and time, and it still found its way home." 80 years ago, those men thought they were leaving a message for one person. They never dreamed the whole world would someday listen. But maybe that's why it matters so deeply, because they spoke without performance, without politics, just truth. When the reels spin now, we hear more than voices. We hear reconciliation between past and present, between former enemies, between generations. It's as if the war itself exhales. The next time you see a photograph from that era, soldiers marching, cities burning, remember that somewhere, hidden under that noise, there was also a whisper waiting to be heard. And when it finally reached us, it reminded the world that history is written in words, but humanity endures in sound. 80 years later, they are still telling their mothers they're safe, and in their echo, maybe we all are.